attic always had a smell. Not an unpleasant one, really. More like a quiet blend of cedarwood, old paper, and time. 11-year-old Jamie had never liked going up there alone. The single window at the far end was usually dust-streaked, casting crooked shadows across the floorboards, and the corners always seemed to whisper when the wind passed through the cracks. But today he was on a mission. His mother had asked him to look for an old box of winter scarves. She was always misplacing seasonal things. It was mid-October, and a surprising chill had rolled in, earlier than usual. Jamie had pulled on 2 pairs of socks and still couldn't feel his toes that morning. He climbed the narrow stairs slowly, flashlight in one hand, the other gripping the wooden banister. The old boards creaked under his sneakers. The door groaned open with the kind of complaint that only old houses knew how to make. As the light from his flashlight swept across boxes, books, and forgotten frames, something caught his eye. A small wooden chest tucked beneath a slanted rafter, half covered by an old wool blanket. Jamie set the flashlight down and pulled the chest into the open. The latch was rusted, but not locked. Inside were yellowed letters, a bundle of black and white photographs tied with twine, and an envelope that had his name on it. His breath caught. The envelope was thick, made of textured parchment, and written in bold, looping script. To Jamie when the time feels right. His fingers trembled a little as he opened it. The letter inside smelled faintly of tobacco and pine. The handwriting was familiar. Steady, warm, and unmistakably Grandpa Henry's. Jamie hadn't seen his grandfather in nearly 2 years. Not since the funeral. The memory still made his chest tighten. Grandpa Henry had always been a little different. Quiet, wise, and somehow magical. He lived far away, in a wooden cabin deep in the woods, and Jamie had only visited a few times growing up. But every memory of that place was like a dream. He unfolded the letter. Dear Jamie, if you're reading this, then something in your heart must have called you here. That means it's time. There's a key in the bottom of this chest. Use it. It opens the front door to the cabin in the woods. The one you used to visit when you were small. I know it's been a long time, and perhaps you don't remember every corner of it. That's okay. The forest remembers you. There are things I never got to tell you. Things that can't be written in a letter. But I've left them for you in the cabin, waiting patiently. Just like the pine trees. Just like me. Take the key, pack warm clothes, and don't forget your sketchbook. The cabin always loved your drawings. With love from the trees. Grandpa Henry. Jamie stared at the letter, his heart thumping in his chest. The air around him suddenly felt warmer, like someone had wrapped him in a soft wool blanket. He remembered the cabin. The big stone fireplace, the smell of stew bubbling in the cast iron pot. The soft creak of the rocking chair as Grandpa hummed a tune no one else seemed to know. He reached into the chest and found a small brass key, dull with age but cool in his hand. There was no question, no hesitation, not even fear. He was going to the cabin. The drive north was long but familiar. His mom had agreed to take him. Somewhat reluctantly, but she'd smiled when he showed her the letter. I suppose your grandfather would have wanted this, she said, her eyes misting a little. But I want you to be careful, Jamie. That place is... well, it's not like anywhere else. Jamie nodded. He didn't need her to tell him that. The air felt different once they turned onto the old forest road. The trees arched overhead like old guardians, golden leaves fluttering like confetti as the car passed underneath. Sunlight spilled in through the windshield in slow waves, dappling the dashboard. Finally, they reached it. The cabin looked almost exactly the same. It was tucked between 2 tall evergreens, the wood darkened with age, the stone chimney gently crumbling but proud. A thin curl of smoke rose from the chimney, which startled Jamie. I thought it was abandoned, he whispered. His mom looked puzzled. It should be. Maybe. The chimney just breathes sometimes. You know this place. But Jamie wasn't so sure. He stepped out of the car, the fallen leaves crunching under his boots, and felt the stillness wrap around him like a scarf. Not silence, just stillness. The kind where the forest listens more than it speaks. He approached the front door slowly, key in hand. The lock turned with a soft click, and the door creaked open. It smelled like pine needles, smoke, and something sweeter, like cinnamon. Dust motes floated in the air like tiny stars, catching the golden light from the window. Everything was exactly as he remembered. The stone fireplace, the worn armchair, the wooden shelves lined with books about trees, birds, and forgotten tales. His sketchbook sat on the wooden table, just where he'd left it 2 years ago. He walked over and touched it, fingers trembling. A small note rested on top of it. "Welcome back, Jamie." He blinked. He hadn't seen anyone, hadn't heard a sound. But the note was there, and the fireplace crackled gently, as though it had been waiting for him. That night, Jamie sat curled in the armchair, sketchbook open on his lap. The fire danced softly, casting long shadows on the walls. He drew without thinking, a winding path through trees, a boy in a red scarf, a tall man with kind eyes and a beard the color of ash. His pencil moved almost on its own. Outside, the wind rustled the trees. An owl hooted once, then fell silent. Jamie didn't feel alone. He felt home. And somewhere, just beyond the edge of sleep, he heard a voice whisper gently, "The forest remembers you, Jamie. It always has." Jamie awoke to the kind of silence that almost hummed, the kind only deep forests could hold. The cabin, bathed in a soft, golden haze from the early morning sun slipping through the lace-curtained window, felt like it had exhaled overnight. The fire in the hearth had gone out, leaving a faint aroma of charred pine and ash, and his blanket was half draped on the floor, the other half tangled around his legs. For a moment, he just lay there on the old couch, blinking up at the wooden beams above him, wondering if yesterday had truly happened, or if it had all been a vivid dream. But then he saw the note on the table, the sketchbook still open to his drawing of the path in the woods, and he knew it had all been real. The cabin was still here, still alive in its quiet way. He stretched, rubbed his eyes, and wandered to the kitchen where the old stove sat, just as rusty and stubborn as ever. But to his surprise, a kettle of water already sat on top of it, warm to the touch. No one else was here. His mother had left after settling him in, promising to call in a few days. But the water, the folded blanket, the tidiness of the place, it felt like someone was still taking care of things. After a quick breakfast of oats and dried apples left in a jar labeled Jamie's favorites, in his grandfather's unmistakable handwriting, he stepped outside, where the air was crisp, edged with the scent of damp leaves and wood smoke from far-off cabins he couldn't see. The trees surrounded him like an audience, tall and motionless, their branches trembling only slightly in the breeze. Remembering the path from his drawing, Jamie began to walk, each step soft against the forest floor blanketed in orange and gold. The forest wasn't silent. It breathed, rustled, chirped, but it felt respectful, as if watching to see what he would do. He wandered further than he expected, guided more by memory than direction, until he came across something he hadn't seen in years. The old treehouse he and Grandpa Henry had built together when he was just 6. It was still there, partially collapsed on one side, but the ladder was sturdy enough, and the platform still held up. Inside, under a layer of fallen leaves, he found a wooden box filled with little treasures. Smooth river stones, pine cones, an old compass, and a wrinkled paper with a drawing of 2 stick figures holding hands. "You and me," Grandpa had said back then. Jamie sat there for a while, running his fingers over the drawing, trying not to cry. Later, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched long across the clearing, he returned to the cabin and noticed something strange. A trail of tiny footprints on the wooden floor leading from the fireplace to the back room. The one that had always been locked when he was little. He followed them slowly, heart beginning to race, the wood creaking gently beneath him like it was speaking in whispers. The door was cracked open now, just slightly. Inside, dust floated in the fading light, and along the far wall stood a tall shelf filled with notebooks. Dozens of them, each labeled with a date and a name. One notebook sat open on the desk beneath the window, its pages filled with sketches of Jamie as a boy, laughing, drawing, climbing trees, sleeping beside the fireplace. His name was written on every page in the same handwriting. Then, below the last drawing, a sentence stood out. "Jamie will come home when the forest is ready." He sat down in the old wooden chair, feeling the warmth of a place that remembered him more clearly than he remembered himself. And as the last of the sun slipped behind the trees and the cabin exhaled again, Jamie whispered to no one, "I missed you, Grandpa." Somewhere in the woods, the wind stirred the leaves in response, not loudly, not insistently, but just enough to say, "I know." That night, Jamie fell asleep with the notebook still open beside him, the last embers in the fireplace casting a soft glow across the wooden floor like sleepy fireflies reluctant to leave. The cabin had grown colder, but he didn't mind. The thick woolen blanket and the lingering warmth of something unseen, perhaps memory, perhaps magic, kept him comfortable as dreams pulled him under. In the middle of the night, a sound woke him. Not a loud sound, but a rhythmic tapping, soft and deliberate, like fingertips against a window pane. He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes, and looked toward the back of the cabin where the old pantry window overlooked the woods. For a second he saw nothing, but then there it was again, tap, 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 and the faintest shape moved behind the glass. He rose, heart thumping not with fear, but with the strange certainty that whatever was out there was waiting for him. He crept across the creaking floor, lifted the edge of the curtain, and looked out. At first, all he saw were the trees, silvered with moonlight, standing like statues. But then his eyes focused, and he saw a figure. Not quite a person, not quite an animal, more like a tall shadow with soft eyes and the shape of antlers woven from branches and moss. It didn't move toward him, didn't threaten or frighten. It simply nodded, turned, and began to walk into the forest, as if inviting him. Jamie hesitated for only a moment, then threw on his coat and boots, grabbed the flashlight from the table, and stepped into the crisp night air. The sky was scattered with stars, a deeper kind of dark that glowed with quiet magic, and the wind carried the scent of pine and something older, like earth after rain. He followed the figure, the flashlight beam dancing over roots and rocks, though the path somehow felt familiar beneath his feet. Deeper into the woods they went, until the trees opened into a wide clearing Jamie had never seen before, yet felt he had always known. In the center stood a giant tree, ancient and knotted, its trunk thick with moss and its branches spreading so wide they reached the stars. The figure stopped and knelt at the base of the tree, then vanished. Not disappeared, but folded into the shadows as though it had returned home. Jamie stepped forward, the hairs on his arms rising, and placed a hand on the tree's bark. It was warm. A low hum vibrated through his fingertips, not a sound but a feeling, like music being played through memory. Then he noticed the carvings, names etched into the trunk, in hundreds of different scripts, languages, and sizes, some faded with age, others freshly carved. Near the center was his grandfather's name, Henry Alderwood, and just below it, a new space had been carved with delicate care, Jamie Alderwood. He stared breathless, unsure if he should be comforted or overwhelmed, but before he could decide, a gust of wind swept through the clearing, shaking the branches with a hush of whispers, so many voices, soft and distant like echoes of old stories. And in those whispers he heard them. Snippets of bedtime tales, of humming lullabies, of Grandpa's laugh as they played cards by the fire. The tree, it seemed, held them all. Every visit, every memory, every word unspoken between them. As he stood there, something small and delicate landed on his shoulder. A pine cone, impossibly tiny, its surface carved with the same pattern as the tree's bark. He held it in his hand, and in that moment he knew. This was no ordinary forest, and the cabin wasn't just a place where memories lived. It was a keeper of legacy, a bridge between hearts that remembered even when minds forgot. When Jamie finally made his way back through the woods, guided not by sight but by the sense of belonging, he felt lighter somehow, as if the forest had taken something heavy from his chest and replaced it with wonder. Back inside the cabin, the fire had mysteriously rekindled itself, glowing low and steady, and the clock on the mantel ticked a little louder, as if happy he'd returned. He placed the tiny pine cone on the desk beside the open sketchbook, sat in Grandpa's old chair, and began to draw. Not just the tree or the figure or the carvings, but the way the wind felt on his face and the silence that hummed with memory. As the lines took shape on the page, he realized he wasn't just remembering. He was becoming part of something that never forgot. The next morning arrived gently, as if the sun knew not to rush the day awake, and Jamie rose with the stillness of someone who had just begun to understand that dreams could leave footprints. The cabin greeted him like it always had, not with noise or action, but with a subtle shift in temperature, the smell of fresh pine, and a soft creak in the ceiling above the fireplace that somehow always meant good morning. He made tea using the old kettle on the stove, pouring it into a faded mug that had once belonged to Grandpa, the one with the chipped rim and the painted bluebird that seemed to wink whenever the light hit it just right. As he sipped, he stared out the wide back window, the one that, according to memory, had always looked out over the forest's edge. But today something was different. Instead of trees and sunlight, the view through the glass showed fog. Not the natural kind that clung to hills and puddled in valleys, but a thick, silvery mist that seemed to ripple like water, stretching endlessly in all directions. It didn't make sense. Jamie opened the window and stuck his hand out. No mist, just cool morning air. But inside the glass, the fog churned, like a painting come to life. Curious now, he touched the glass with both hands and leaned closer, eyes narrowing. And just for a second, he saw something move. Not clearly, not completely, but enough to startle him. A figure, distant but upright, walking slowly through the mist as if searching for something. It wore a long coat, and the way it moved triggered something in Jamie's chest. Not fear, but familiarity. Then it vanished. He pulled back, heart racing a little faster, and glanced around the room as if someone might explain it to him. Of course, no one did. Only the clock on the mantel answered with its steady ticking, and the fireplace whispered in soft crackles. He should have felt afraid, but instead he felt drawn to it. Later that day, while exploring the shelves in the back room, the one filled with Grandpa's notebooks, Jamie found a thin volume bound in dark green leather with no title. Inside were sketches of the cabin from different angles, but always with that same back window at the center of the page. Some showed fog. Others showed night skies filled with stars he didn't recognize, or swirling galaxies far too close to be real. One page had only a sentence. "This window doesn't look out, it looks through." Jamie ran his fingers over the page, the words carved deep into the paper with firm, steady pressure. He carried the notebook to the window and sat there for hours, sketching what he saw. The fog remained, but every so often another shape would pass. A deer with golden antlers, a small boat gliding silently across a lake that wasn't there, a door floating midair that blinked out like a star. Each time, Jamie would blink and wonder if he imagined it. But each time, the sketch in his lap would show the thing exactly as he'd seen it, as if the pencil remembered even when his eyes doubted. That night, he left the window open just a crack and lay in bed listening to the forest outside and the strange hush from the window behind him. In the early hours before dawn, a voice spoke, not loudly, not from any direction, but clear and unmistakable. "Not all places can be found on maps, Jamie." He sat up, breathing shallow, eyes wide in the dim light. The fog had cleared. Through the window now he could see stars again, but not the constellations he knew. These were slow-moving, shimmering symbols that rearranged themselves like language. And though he couldn't read them, he understood. This cabin, this forest, this very moment was part of something much older, something that existed just beyond the thin veil of normal life. The window wasn't showing visions. It was offering glimpses of truths too soft to shout. Jamie turned back to the green notebook and added his own drawing. One of the cabin as it had appeared in his dream last night, perched not in a forest, but on a high cliff surrounded by clouds, with roots descending into the sky like anchors in the wind. Below it, he wrote only 4 words. "The cabin knows everything." And as he put down the pencil, the fog gently began to return, curling back into the glass like a curtain lowering at the end of a scene, and he whispered aloud, because somehow he knew the window was listening. "I'm not ready to leave yet." The fireplace flickered in reply, casting shadows that looked suspiciously like a nod. Jamie spent the next 2 days moving between waking hours and wonder. The cabin and the forest beginning to feel less like places, and more like living pages in a story he had forgotten he was part of. The air itself seemed thicker with meaning. Each leaf that fell landed with purpose. Each gust of wind arrived like a sigh from a memory not quite his. The fog in the back window had returned and stayed, and while it no longer frightened him, he now treated it with the reverence one might give a wild animal or a sleeping deity. He noticed small things changing. A drawer in the hallway dresser that had always been stuck was suddenly slightly ajar. A feather that hadn't been there before now rested atop the rocking chair, silvery and hollow like moonlight turned solid. And the old cuckoo clock in the kitchen began working again after years of silence, ticking in sync with his heartbeat whenever he stood close. But it was the drawer that drew him most, because each time he passed it, morning, afternoon, evening, it would be open just a bit more, as though the house itself was slowly inviting him to discover something when the moment was right. On the 3rd evening, as the sky turned the color of burnt sugar and the trees outside whispered like a chorus of old friends, Jamie walked past the hallway and found the drawer fully open for the first time. It hadn't been forced. It looked as though it had decided to open. Inside lay a bundle of folded cloth, an old scarf, soft as breath, deep forest green with a golden pine tree embroidered at the edge. And beneath it, a wooden box the size of a paperback book, bound shut with a piece of fraying twine. Jamie lifted the box gently and carried it to the table by the fireplace, sitting where Grandpa used to sit when he told stories. Untying the twine felt like unsealing a chapter. Inside were small objects, laid out carefully. A pressed flower, once violet but faded to gray-blue. A silver coin marked with a tree on one side and a star on the other. A photograph of a young Henry, his grandfather, standing in front of the cabin with a wide grin, holding hands with someone whose face had been torn away by time or intent. But it was the small folded note tucked into the lid that sent a chill down Jamie's spine, for it was addressed simply, "For when the window speaks." He read it twice before realizing the ink had smudged slightly, as though written in a hurry or in emotion. The note read, "The window shows what memory can't. It's not just a view, it's a gate. If it ever speaks your name, don't answer with fear. Step through." Jamie sat back, the note trembling in his hands. Step through? He turned toward the back window, but it was quiet now, just fog and the faint shimmer of hidden constellations. Still, the message pressed itself into his mind, wrapping around his thoughts like ivy. That night he couldn't sleep. He lay curled in his grandfather's old wool blanket, listening to the night sounds. The distant owl, the creak of the trees, the steady breath of the fireplace, and his thoughts swirled like the fog outside the glass. He dreamed not in scenes but in sensations. The weight of his grandfather's hand on his shoulder, the smell of stew and pine needles, the sound of a voice calling his name not with words, but with knowing. When he woke, just before dawn, there was a word written in the condensation on the inside of the back window. For letters, curved in familiar handwriting, Jamie. He didn't scream, didn't even flinch. He stood slowly, walked to the window, and placed his palm flat against the glass. It was warm again, humming faintly beneath his skin. "I'm listening," he said softly. Nothing happened at first, but then, a faint glow began to seep through the mist, like the sunrise behind heavy clouds, and the fog started to swirl outward from the center of the glass, creating a tunnel of light and shadow. Shapes moved at the edge of the mist. A path formed, one Jamie recognized, but not from this life. From dreams, maybe, or memories inherited from someone who had once walked it. The window wasn't just showing him anymore. It was inviting him. The cabin held its breath. The clock stopped ticking, and Jamie whispered, "I think I'm ready." Jamie didn't dress in any special way before stepping forward. Just his flannel shirt, warm boots, and the green scarf from the drawer, wrapped once around his neck like an old friend. The air inside the cabin had become impossibly still, as though even the walls were holding their breath, and yet nothing felt frightening. The fog inside the window continued to curl like smoke rising backward, slowly unveiling that tunnel of silvery light framed by tree-shaped shadows that swayed without wind. His hand touched the glass again, and this time it passed through, not breaking it, not pushing it aside, but dissolving into something softer than mist, warmer than water. He didn't think. He stepped through. There was no jolt, no thunder, no bright flash like in movies. Just a quiet release, as though gravity itself had changed its mind. On the other side, he found himself standing in a forest that looked like the one he knew, but felt utterly different. The trees were taller, older, their trunks etched with symbols that shifted when he blinked. The sky was indigo, scattered with slow-moving stars that pulsed like the rhythm of a heartbeat. Light came not from the sun, but from within the leaves themselves, each one faintly glowing with color and breath. Jamie turned slowly, feeling the ground beneath him hum with recognition, and behind him, the window still hovered mid-air like a painting hanging in the middle of a dream. He was not alone here. He felt it immediately, though not in the way people feel watched. This was different. The forest was aware of him, and as he stepped further into the trees, the light deepened, turning gold near the roots and blue above the canopy, and a quiet sound began to rise. A song with no lyrics, only emotion. He followed the path that unfurled at his feet, made of woven moss and soft stones, until he reached a small clearing where a stone bench sat beside a pool of water, so still it looked like a mirror. He sat, not because he was tired, but because the place seemed to ask him to. Across the pool stood a figure, not fully formed, not solid, but shaped like someone he knew. The outline of a tall man with familiar shoulders, hands held behind his back, looking at him with eyes that glowed faintly like firelight. Jamie didn't speak at first, and neither did the figure. Instead, the figure knelt and touched the water, sending ripples across its surface. And as they reached Jamie's side of the pool, images began to form in them. His grandfather holding a small bird in his palm, whispering stories to it. Jamie as a toddler giggling in the cabin's kitchen. His mother as a young girl, playing in the same woods where Jamie now walked. The memories weren't his alone. They were shared, preserved, like chapters kept inside this forest's great library of time. Finally, the figure spoke. Not with a mouth, but with presence, words forming in Jamie's chest as clearly as if they were his own thoughts. Memory is not the past, it said. It is the seed of everything still growing. Jamie felt his eyes sting, but he did not cry. He only nodded, heart rising like a tide against his ribs. Are you him? He asked, voice trembling. Or are you just what's left? The figure smiled, not in mockery or mystery, but with warmth that melted something deep inside Jamie's chest. I am not a ghost, it answered. I am a root, and you are my branch. At those words, the wind stirred. Not just here, but through the trees on the other side of the window, back in the real cabin, as if something distant had just exhaled. The figure pointed to a path behind Jamie, one he hadn't seen before, narrower and edged with flickering lights like fireflies made of memory. Walk it, the voice said. Walk it until you find the door that only opens once. Inside it is not an ending, but a beginning your name has always known. Jamie stood slowly, legs steady beneath him, though the weight of what he'd just heard settled into his bones like snow, soft, quiet, and unshakably permanent. He turned toward the new path, looking back only once to see the figure fading like mist in morning light, and he whispered, "Thank you, Grandpa," because there was nothing else to say. And the trees responded, not with sound, but with stillness, the kind that carries a promise not yet spoken aloud. The path stretched ahead, winding through the trees like a forgotten trail, its edges shimmering with the soft glow of tiny lights. Jamie walked slowly, his boots sinking into the moss with each step, the sensation grounding him as the world around him shifted ever so slightly, like the forest itself was holding its breath. The air had grown thicker, richer with the scent of earth and pine, and as he moved, the sounds of the forest changed too. No longer just the usual rustling of leaves or distant bird calls, but something deeper like a chorus of whispers, too faint to make out, but unmistakably present. He wasn't sure where the path was leading, but every step felt like a step closer to something that had been waiting for him. Something that didn't just belong to the forest, but to him, woven into his very being. Up ahead, the lights intensified, forming an archway of glowing orbs that hovered just above the ground. And as Jamie neared, the air seemed to shimmer with energy, the temperature rising and falling in quick succession, like the pulse of a living heart. He stopped in front of the arch, gazing through the luminescence toward the stone door standing at its center. The door was tall, its surface covered in delicate carvings of trees, vines, and stars. It looked ancient, but not decrepit, alive, like it had been crafted only moments ago by hands that understood both the past and future. Its wooden frame was warm to the touch, as though it had been waiting for him specifically. And as he reached for the handle, he realized his breath had caught in his throat, his pulse quickening. He didn't know why, but he had always known this door would appear. "You found it," came a voice, calm and steady, not from behind, but from within. The forest, the door, the silence between his thoughts. It all spoke at once. Jamie turned, but there was no figure now. No figure except the shadow of his own reflection in the door's surface. He saw himself clearly, young, wide-eyed, with a quiet wonder on his face, yet there was something different in his expression now, something more knowing, like he had lived through lifetimes in the span of a single night. His hand reached out to the door's handle, and it opened without resistance, as if it had always been ready to let him through. Beyond it, there was no room, no space, just more forest, only it was different. The trees were taller, their leaves shimmering with colors not seen in the natural world, and the ground beneath his feet glowed faintly, as if the earth itself was alive with quiet energy. The air felt both weightless and dense, like being submerged in a memory that he had yet to live. Stepping through the door was not like crossing a threshold. It was like sinking into water or floating in a dream. It felt as though everything around him had been waiting for this very moment. And in that moment, Jamie understood. This forest, this place, was not bound by time. It was the keeper of all things, memories, stories, and legacies. It was the gateway to every unspoken word, every forgotten touch, every lost moment in his life. It had always been here, and now he was part of it. He stepped forward, moving deeper into the woods, the path unfurling beneath him like an invitation. And though he didn't understand everything, he felt the truth of it in his chest. He belonged here. The trees opened as he walked, creating a path that seemed to guide him forward, and he followed it without question, trusting that each step would lead him to something he wasn't quite ready for, but needed to discover all the same. The light from the path began to grow dimmer, and soon, the forest was alive only with the faint rustle of leaves and the soft murmur of ancient voices in the distance. Then through the trees he saw it, a stone bench like the one in the clearing earlier, but this one was not empty. A figure sat there, cloaked in deep shadows, its face obscured by a hood. For a moment, Jamie hesitated, but then, as though compelled by some unseen force, he walked toward the figure. When he stood in front of it, the figure raised its head slowly, revealing the familiar features of his grandfather. Only not as he had been in life, but as a part of something much older, a being woven from both past and future. His eyes, though older than Jamie remembered, still held the warmth and wisdom he had known since childhood. "Grandpa," Jamie whispered, his voice trembling not with fear, but with something else, a recognition of the deep bond between them that no time could sever. The figure smiled, a soft, knowing smile, and nodded. "It's you," it said, its voice a melody that echoed in Jamie's chest. "You've always been here. You've always belonged to this place." Jamie sank to his knees beside the bench, overwhelmed with the weight of it all. He felt tears sting at the corners of his eyes, but they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of understanding, of finally seeing the truth that had been waiting for him in every story his grandfather had told, in every step he had taken into the woods as a child. This forest, this world, was not just a memory. It was a home, and it had always been waiting for him to return. The figure reached out, placing a hand on Jamie's shoulder, its touch warm and solid. "You're not just a visitor here," it said. "You are a part of everything. The forest, the stories, the memories, they live in you. And you in them." Jamie nodded slowly, not needing words to understand the depth of what he was being told. The figure rose and extended a hand to him. "Come," it said. "There's more to see, more to remember. You're ready now." Jamie took the hand, and as he did, the forest around him seemed to inhale and exhale in unison, the world unfolding as if he were part of its very breath. They walked together, deeper into the heart of the woods, where memories danced on the edges of time, waiting for him to uncover them, piece by piece. Jamie followed the figure of his grandfather deeper into the woods, each step drawing him further into a place that seemed both familiar and new. The trees stood taller now, their bark shimmering faintly in the pale light, the air thick with the scent of pine and earth. But there was something else, a kind of hum that vibrated through the ground beneath his feet, as if the forest itself was alive, breathing with purpose. As they walked, Jamie could feel the forest's heartbeat in his chest, a steady rhythm that matched his own pulse. It was as though the very essence of the land, the trees, the roots, and the sky were all one, intertwined and inseparable. There were no sounds of wildlife here, no rustling leaves, no chirping birds. Instead, there was a silence that was not empty but full, rich with a kind of ancient knowing that Jamie couldn't quite grasp. He felt as if he were walking through a dream, one where the boundaries between the past and present blurred, and time itself had no meaning. "Grandpa, where are we going?" Jamie asked, his voice barely more than a whisper, as though speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile peace around them. His grandfather, or the being that wore his form, turned to him, his face bathed in the soft light filtering through the canopy above. "We're going where the stories begin," the figure said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "Where the heart of the forest beats." They reached a clearing, one that Jamie recognized immediately, a place he had never seen before but knew intimately, like a memory buried deep in his mind. It was the same clearing he had dreamed of as a child, the one that had haunted him, the one that always felt like it was just out of reach. In the center of the clearing stood a massive tree, its trunk wide and twisted, its branches reaching up to the sky like ancient arms, hands that grasped for something just beyond the stars. The tree was unlike any Jamie had ever seen before. Its bark was smooth and silver, and its leaves shimmered with a soft, otherworldly glow. Around the tree was a circle of stones, each one etched with symbols Jamie didn't understand, but somehow felt he should. At the base of the tree was a small door, just big enough for a person to pass through, and above it, inscribed in the bark, were words Jamie could not read, but the meaning of them pulsed in his chest as if he had known them his whole life. His grandfather walked toward the door and placed a hand on the trunk of the tree. The moment his fingers touched the bark, the door creaked open, revealing a dark passage that led downward into the earth. "This is the heart of the forest," the figure said, his voice soft but full of reverence. "This is where all stories are born." Jamie's heart raced, and yet there was no fear. Only the deep, unshakable certainty that this was the moment he had been waiting for. He didn't hesitate. Without a word, he stepped forward, following his grandfather into the darkness. The passage was narrow and winding, the walls lined with roots that twisted like veins, pulsing with a strange energy that seemed to hum in Jamie's bones. The air was cool and damp, and the smell of earth was thick, but there was something else in the air too, a faint, sweet scent, like honey and pine, that made his senses sharpen and his thoughts clear. As they descended deeper into the earth, the light from above faded, replaced by a soft glow that emanated from the roots themselves. It was not a light from any source Jamie could see, but it was enough to guide their way, casting long shadows along the walls. The deeper they went, the more Jamie felt a pull in his chest, like something was drawing him closer, urging him to go further. It wasn't fear, it was a longing, a sense of destiny that he couldn't explain. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the bottom. The passage opened up into a vast cavern, its ceiling so high it was lost in shadow. The ground beneath them was soft, covered in moss and roots, and in the center of the cavern stood a large stone pedestal, upon which rested an ancient book. The book was massive, its cover made of dark wood, inlaid with shimmering stones that seemed to shift and change with the light. It was old, older than the cabin, older than the forest itself, and yet it radiated with a quiet, untold power. Jamie felt his heart skip a beat. This was it. This was what he had been brought here for. "This is the Book of Beginnings," his grandfather said, his voice a low murmur in the vast silence. "Every story ever told, every memory ever made begins here. And one day, you will add your own chapter to it." Jamie stepped closer, his hand trembling as he reached for the book. But just as his fingers brushed against the cover, a voice echoed in the cavern, deep and resonant, like the earth itself speaking. "The stories are not just to be told," the voice said. "They are to be lived." Jamie turned, his heart pounding in his chest. The cavern was empty. His grandfather was gone. But the words hung in the air, filling the space around him, the weight of them pressing against his chest like a promise. He turned back to the book, his hand steady now, and he opened it. The pages were blank, waiting for him. The words had not been written yet, but Jamie understood something then. He wasn't just a part of the story, he was the one who would write it. The stories, the memories, the legacy, they all lived within him, within every step he had taken to reach this point. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in the scent of the earth, the hum of the forest, and when he opened them again, he knew what he had to do. He stepped forward, his hand hovering over the pages, and began to write. Jamie's fingers hovered over the blank pages of the ancient book, a deep silence settling around him as the words from the cavern's mysterious voice echoed through his mind. The stories are not just to be told, they are to be lived. The weight of those words pressed on his chest, and he felt an almost overwhelming urge to write, to record. But there was something else too. It wasn't just a simple act of writing, of telling a story. It felt as if the act of putting ink to the pages would connect him to something deeper. Something that had always been there, but had only now revealed itself to him. His hand trembled slightly, the warmth of the book seeping into his skin as he brushed his fingers across its ancient surface. The book wasn't just a collection of stories. It was a bridge between worlds, between memory and possibility, between the past he had inherited and the future that was yet to be written. As his fingers hovered closer to the first page, Jamie felt the unmistakable sensation of something watching him. Not in the way of an observer, but in the way the forest watched, as if it, too, was waiting for him to begin. His breath slowed, and a profound stillness settled in his chest. For a brief moment he closed his eyes, letting the sounds of the cavern, the hum of the roots, the whisper of distant winds, the pulse of the earth beneath him, wash over him. It was as though the very air around him was alive, waiting, breathing with him. Then, with a sense of clarity, Jamie reached forward, the tips of his fingers grazing the first blank page, and he began to write. The words flowed easily, as though they had been waiting for him to give them life. I am Jamie, the one who walks between the worlds, between the stories and the silence, between memory and what is yet to be. I am a branch of the tree, a root in the forest, a thread woven into the fabric of all things that have been and all things that are to come. The words felt natural as he wrote them, yet at the same time they were strange, not fully his own. They came from somewhere deep within him, from a place he couldn't fully understand. And as he continued, the ink began to shimmer on the page, glowing faintly with the same ethereal light that had filled the cavern. With each word, it was as if the book itself was awakening, its pages alive with the energy of the forest, with the energy of his own thoughts, his own soul. He felt the connection deepen, the bond between him and this place growing stronger. It wasn't just the forest he was writing into existence. It was himself. As he wrote, Jamie realized that the stories didn't just come from the past or the future. They came from within him, from his own heart, from the things he had lived and the things he had yet to experience. The forest, the cabin, his grandfather. These were all parts of the story he had inherited, but now he had the power to shape it. With each word, he was writing the next chapter, not just for himself, but for the forest, for the world, for the future that was yet to be lived. He paused, taking in the weight of this realization. The book in his hands was no ordinary book. It was a living document, a manifestation of every choice, every action, every thought that had ever been made. It was the keeper of all things, the guardian of memories, and it was now a part of him. The more he wrote, the more the world around him seemed to shift and change. The cavern pulsed with energy, the roots of the trees stretching out, weaving into the very fabric of the earth, connecting him to something larger than he could ever have imagined. It was as if he were writing not just words, but reality itself. The forest, the cabin, the life he had lived, and the life he would live. They were all part of the same story, and he was the one who would write its ending. As Jamie wrote, he felt a hand on his shoulder, warm and steady. He looked up, startled, and found his grandfather standing beside him, no longer a figure made of light, but solid and real, just as he had been when Jamie was a child. His grandfather smiled at him, a soft, knowing smile. "You found your place," he said, his voice gentle but full of strength. "The story has always been yours, Jamie. It always has been." Jamie felt tears welling up in his eyes, not from sadness, but from something deeper. It was the overwhelming truth that he was not alone here, that he was part of something much bigger, something that had always been waiting for him to take the next step. The story was his to tell, and through it, he could change the world. "I don't know if I can write it all," Jamie whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "There's so much to say, so much I don't understand." His grandfather's eyes softened. "You don't have to write it all at once, Jamie. The story will unfold as it must. It will live with you, grow with you, and when the time comes, you'll know exactly what to write." Jamie nodded slowly, the weight of his grandfather's words settling deep in his chest. The story was never meant to be written all at once. It was meant to be lived. He took a deep breath and turned back to the book, his fingers brushing over the pages. As he did, something new happened. The words began to appear on their own, as though the book was responding to the very act of his presence, to the very act of his heart. He didn't need to write them. They came to him, flowing from the depths of his soul, filling the pages with stories he had not yet lived, but that were always meant to be his. The first chapter was written, but the story was far from over, and Jamie knew with certainty that the forest would always be with him, always be a part of him. He was no longer just a boy from the cabin in the woods. He was the keeper of the stories, the one who walked between the worlds, and his journey, like the forest, would never end. The ink shimmered across the pages of the ancient book, and as Jamie continued to write, something began to stir within him. A quiet, almost imperceptible shift, like a whisper of something distant but real. The stories were unfolding on their own now, the words appearing faster than he could ever have written them. He was no longer simply recording his thoughts. He was becoming a part of the forest's living tapestry, his actions, his thoughts, his very being intertwined with every word on the page. The weight of it was both thrilling and terrifying, and for a moment, Jamie stopped, his hand hovering above the book, the quill trembling slightly in his grasp. His grandfather's presence lingered beside him, a calm, steadying force, though he had not spoken for some time. "What happens now?" Jamie asked, his voice quiet but filled with the need for understanding. The words were already flowing, but they were still mysterious, like fragments of dreams he had not yet fully remembered. His grandfather turned toward him, his face bathed in a soft light that seemed to emanate from the very trees themselves. "What happens now," his grandfather said, "is that you learn to listen. You must learn to hear the stories not only in the book but in the forest, in the silence, in the space between each breath. The words are not just words. They are echoes of what has been and what is yet to come." Jamie's heart raced as he considered what his grandfather had said. Echoes of what is yet to come. Was he writing about the future now? Could he change the course of events with his words? He glanced down at the pages in front of him. They seemed to shimmer, alive with a strange energy, and as he looked closer, something curious happened. The words that had already been written began to shift and change, as though they were shifting not just on the page, but through time itself. The sentences blurred for a moment, then realigned, rewriting themselves as though the past and the future were blending together. "The future is always changing," his grandfather's voice came, as if he had heard Jamie's unspoken question. "The stories we write are not fixed in stone. They are alive, constantly evolving with every decision, every moment. The forest, the cabin, your connection to this place. Everything is part of the story, and you must embrace that uncertainty." Jamie felt a shiver run through him. The weight of it all felt almost unbearable. How could he possibly hold such power? The ability to shape not just his future, but the very fabric of reality itself? "But what if I make the wrong choice?" Jamie whispered, his voice cracking with fear. "What if the future I write leads to something terrible?" His grandfather's eyes softened with a deep, knowing compassion. "There are no wrong choices, Jamie," he said gently. "Every choice is part of the journey, part of the story. The forest is not a place of perfection. It is a place of growth, of learning. You are not here to perfect the world, but to experience it, to learn from it and from yourself." Jamie took in his grandfather's words, letting them sink into his heart. The fear still lingered in his chest, but it was slowly giving way to something else, a kind of quiet confidence. Maybe he didn't need to control everything. Maybe it was enough to live the story, to let it unfold as it would. He looked down at the book, still open before him, and for the first time, the words that filled the pages no longer seemed so daunting. They were not his alone to write. They were part of a larger tapestry, and he was simply one thread woven into it. Jamie felt a sense of peace settle over him, and as the words began to flow once more, they did so freely, without the heavy burden of expectation. The future would unfold as it was meant to, and his place in the story was as important as the stars in the sky, both distant and close, both necessary and infinite. As he wrote, the forest around him seemed to respond. The trees swayed gently, and the air thickened with the scent of pine and damp earth, as though the entire world was listening to the words he put to paper. With each sentence, Jamie felt the forest grow stronger, more vibrant, as if the words he wrote were feeding the very life force of the land. The book was more than just a chronicle. It was a living connection to everything, to the pulse of the earth, the flow of time, and the ever-expanding horizon of possibility. He wrote, and in doing so, he was part of something greater than himself. His grandfather placed a hand on his shoulder once again, grounding him. "Remember, Jamie," he said, his voice calm, "the stories you write are not just for you. They are for everyone. They are the bridge between worlds, between generations. The book is a legacy. And so are you." Jamie nodded, absorbing his grandfather's words. The forest felt even more alive now, the trees towering above him like sentinels, their leaves rustling with an ancient rhythm. He looked back at the book, feeling a deep connection to it, to the cabin, to the forest, and to the legacy of his family that stretched back through time. He wasn't just a boy anymore, wandering through the woods in search of answers. He was a part of the forest's story, and his role, his place in the grand scheme of things, was not just one of discovery, but of creation. Jamie's eyes shifted to the horizon, where the forest met the sky, and for the first time, he felt as if he understood what his grandfather had meant. The forest was not just a place, it was a story, and he was part of it. A small part, yes, but an important one. He had come here seeking answers, but now he realized that the journey itself, the living of it, was the answer. And so, with newfound understanding, Jamie continued to write. He wrote not with the burden of a past he couldn't change, or the weight of a future he couldn't control, but with the quiet certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The story would unfold as it always had, as it always would. And he would live it, chapter by chapter, step by step, surrounded by the living forest and the memory of his grandfather. And for the first time, Jamie knew that the forest was no longer a mystery to him. It was home. The days that followed in the forest felt like they were stretched out across time, like the very earth beneath Jamie's feet was moving with a rhythm of its own, one that could not be measured by clocks or calendars. He spent his time writing in the book, his connection to the words deepening with each passing day, and the forest responded in kind. The trees seemed to grow stronger, more vivid, their branches reaching high into the sky, their leaves shimmering with the glow of something ancient. It was as if the stories he wrote were infusing the very land with life, breathing into it a new energy. As he walked through the woods now, the ground felt softer, the air lighter, and the once silent forest seemed to hum with the rhythm of his words. The whispers of the trees, the rustling of the leaves, and the gentle sway of the branches all seemed to speak to him, guiding him, encouraging him to continue. It was as if the forest itself had become alive, not just in a physical sense, but in a spiritual one. And Jamie knew, deep in his heart, that this connection he had discovered was more than just a bond between himself and the land. It was a bond between himself and the generations that had walked these woods before him. It was a bond between the living and the dead, between the stories of the past and the future that had yet to be written. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting a soft orange glow across the trees, Jamie found himself standing at the edge of a small clearing. The same clearing where he had first encountered the glowing tree. The tree stood as it had before, its twisted branches reaching upward, its bark shimmering with an otherworldly light. But tonight, something was different. Tonight, the air was charged with an energy he had never felt before, a presence that seemed to fill the space around him. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. And then, in the quiet of the moment, he heard it, a soft whisper, barely audible but unmistakable. It was the same voice he had heard before, in the cavern, in the depths of the earth. "Jamie," the voice said, and this time it was clearer, closer. "You are ready." He turned, looking around the clearing, but there was no one there. The whisper seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once, as if it were coming from the trees themselves, from the earth beneath his feet. "Ready for what?" Jamie asked, his voice trembling slightly with anticipation and curiosity. The voice responded, not in words, but in the rustling of the leaves, in the way the branches of the trees swayed in the wind, in the sound of the earth shifting beneath him. It was as if the entire forest was speaking to him, each part of it a thread in the tapestry of something much larger, something ancient. "Ready to see the spirit of the woods," the voice said, its tone reverberating in his chest. "Ready to embrace your true role." The words hung in the air, and Jamie felt a shiver run down his spine. His heart pounded in his chest, but this time, there was no fear. There was only the deep, unshakable sense that he was exactly where he needed to be. He closed his eyes, and as he did, the world around him seemed to change. The sounds of the forest faded, replaced by a deep, resonant hum that seemed to come from the earth itself. The air grew thick, charged with an energy that Jamie could feel in every fiber of his being. When he opened his eyes again, the clearing had transformed. The tree before him was no longer just a tree. It was a portal, a gateway into something beyond. Its bark was glowing brighter now, its branches twisting and stretching as if they were reaching for something far, far away. And standing before the tree, in the center of the clearing, was a figure. A spirit, draped in flowing robes of leaves and vines, with skin that shimmered like the moonlight. The spirit's eyes were kind but ancient, filled with the wisdom of the forest, and its presence was both calming and overwhelming. It was a being of light, of air, of earth, the very embodiment of the forest itself. "You have come," the spirit said, its voice like the wind rustling through the trees. "You have come to understand the truth of this place." Jamie stood still, his heart racing, but there was no fear. There was only awe. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice soft, yet filled with reverence. The spirit smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "I am the spirit of the woods," it said simply. "I am the essence of all that has grown here, and all that will grow. I am the keeper of the forest's memory, and I have watched over this land for as long as the trees have stood." Jamie's breath caught in his throat. The spirit was everything he had ever imagined, and yet it was something far more than he could ever comprehend. It was as if the very spirit of the forest had come alive before him, its form taking shape just for him to witness. "You are the one," the spirit continued. The one chosen to walk between the worlds, to write the stories that will shape the future. The forest has chosen you, and in turn, you must choose your path. Jamie felt a deep sense of purpose welling up inside him. Something he had not felt before, but something that felt as though it had always been there, waiting for him to recognize it. "What do I have to do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, filled with reverence and wonder. The spirit's eyes glimmered, and it stepped forward, its presence a comforting force that seemed to soothe the very air around them. "You must continue what has been started," the spirit said. "The stories of the past, the memories of the forest, they are all written in the book. But there are stories yet untold, futures that have yet to be written. You are the keeper of those stories, Jamie. You are the one who will guide the forest into the future." Jamie's heart swelled with a sense of purpose he could not put into words. He had come to the forest seeking answers, but now he understood that the answers were not just for him. They were for everyone, for every creature that walked this land, for every spirit that lingered in the trees, for every future that would grow from the roots of this ancient place. "You are ready," the spirit said again, its voice like a gentle breeze. "You are the writer of stories, the one who will carry the forest's memory into the future. The path you walk is not an easy one, but it is the one you were always meant to follow." With that, the spirit turned and stepped toward the glowing tree. As it did, the light from the tree brightened, surrounding the spirit with a soft, radiant glow. And then, in the blink of an eye, the spirit disappeared, leaving Jamie standing in the clearing, alone but not alone, surrounded by the wisdom of the forest. The tree still glowed softly in front of him, its bark pulsing with life, as if inviting him to step forward, to continue his journey. Jamie didn't hesitate. He stepped toward the tree, his hand outstretched, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. As he touched the trunk, the world around him seemed to shift once more, and the pages of the book in his hands flickered with new, unwritten words. The future was waiting, and Jamie was ready to write it. The forest was alive in a way Jamie had never imagined. The trees, the wind, the very soil beneath him. It all seemed to be waiting for him, responding to his thoughts, to his actions. The air around him shimmered, as if the world itself were bending to the force of his new understanding. With every step he took, every word he wrote, the forest grew stronger, more vibrant. He no longer felt like an outsider here. He was home. The book in his hands felt heavier now, as though it were filled with not just stories of the past, but with the power to shape what was yet to come. Each page turned seemed to breathe with life, as if the ink was drawn from the forest itself, from the very pulse of the earth. The stories had begun to write themselves, flowing freely as though they were part of the living world around him. He was not just a recorder of history. He was a creator, a guardian, a keeper of the untold stories of the forest. And yet, with all this power, Jamie did not feel the burden he had once feared. Instead, there was a calmness within him, a certainty that this was where he was meant to be. The forest was his responsibility, but it was also his companion. And as he wrote, the forest responded. One evening, as the moon hung low in the sky, casting a silvery glow over the woods, Jamie found himself standing before the cabin. The familiar sight of the old wooden structure, now more weathered than ever, brought a sense of peace to his heart. The cabin had always been a symbol of his connection to his grandfather, but now it felt like something more. It was a link to the past, to the stories that had shaped him, but it was also a symbol of his future. The future he would help shape with the stories he wrote, with the legacy he carried forward. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faintest scent of pine and earth. Jamie took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything that had come before him and everything that was still to come. He stepped onto the porch of the cabin, and as he did, he saw his grandfather standing there, as real as if he had never left. "Grandfather," Jamie said, his voice thick with emotion, "I don't know if I'm ready. There's so much to do, so many stories to tell." His grandfather smiled, a soft, knowing smile that filled Jamie with warmth. "You've always been ready, Jamie. The stories don't wait for anyone. They've been waiting for you." Jamie nodded, understanding now. The stories had always been there, woven into the very fabric of the forest. It wasn't about waiting for the perfect moment or for some grand revelation. It was about living the story, about embracing the journey, no matter where it led. He turned back toward the forest, feeling the pull of it, the call of the untold stories. He could hear the trees rustling in the distance, the wind carrying whispers of voices long forgotten, of memories that had yet to be made. The forest was waiting for him to write the next chapter. With one last glance at the cabin, Jamie made his way into the woods, the book in his hands a steady, reassuring weight. The words would come. The stories would unfold. He was no longer a boy in search of answers. He was the writer of his own destiny, the keeper of the forest's secrets, the one who would carry its memory into the future. Years passed, and Jamie's life unfolded in ways he could never have predicted. The cabin in the woods remained, standing as a quiet testament to the legacy of his family, to the stories that had been written and those that were still being told. The book Jamie had discovered, his grandfather's book, remained with him, its pages never truly full, always shifting, always alive with the stories of the forest. The village nearby had begun to notice the changes in the woods. The trees grew taller, their branches stretching farther, their leaves shimmering with the glow of something ancient and powerful. The animals of the forest seemed to thrive in ways they had never done before, and the people who ventured into the woods often spoke of an undeniable peace that had settled over the land. Those who had once feared the forest now found themselves drawn to it, to the stories that whispered through the trees, to the quiet magic that lay hidden in its depths. But Jamie knew the truth. The forest's magic was not something to be feared. It was something to be embraced, something to be protected. The stories of the past, the ones his grandfather had told him, were not just stories. They were living, breathing things, and they would continue to grow and change as long as there was someone to write them. Jamie became a legend in his own right. Some spoke of him as a writer, others as a sage, but Jamie knew that he was none of those things. He was simply the keeper of the stories, the one who had learned to listen to the voices of the forest, and to write the future with each passing word. And in doing so, he had become part of the forest itself, its stories, its memories, its very soul. As the years passed, Jamie's visits to the cabin became fewer, but the forest remained ever present in his heart. He often returned to write, to listen, to feel the pulse of the world around him. And each time he did, the forest seemed to welcome him back with open arms, as though it too remembered the role he had played in its ongoing story. One day, when Jamie was an old man, he sat in the cabin's porch, his hands trembling slightly as he held the book. The sun had set, casting a golden glow across the trees. He could hear the whispers of the forest all around him, feel the weight of the stories that had been written, and those that were still waiting to be told. And as he looked out over the woods, Jamie knew that the forest would live on long after he was gone. The stories would continue to be written, the future would continue to unfold, and the legacy of the forest, his legacy, would remain a living testament to the power of words, of stories, and of the deep, unbroken connection between all things. The wind rustled through the trees, and Jamie closed his eyes, a peaceful smile crossing his face. He had done his part. The stories were alive, and they would continue to live, as long as there was someone to listen and someone to write.